All right, it's just after 1 o'clock here, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Does that sound good, Cindy, Mike? All right, perfect, great. Well, hello everyone. I'm Sylvia Chabrowski with Kearns and West, helping to facilitate today's meeting open to the public. So you are here at the Oregon Department of Forestry's meeting to provide an update on the Western Oregon State Forests Forest Management Plan and Habitat Conservation Plan. So we are so excited that you can join us today to hear today's update. I'll spend a couple of minutes just going through our meeting guidelines and agenda before we kick off for today. So if we go to the next slide, just want to remind everyone about our remote participation tips. I know we've all been in the Zoom world for quite some time now, but just a reminder to keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. And we're going to have portions of today's meeting for Q&A and discussion. So when we get to those parts, we'll just ask you to raise your hand to get in the queue to speak, and we'll show you how to do that in just a second. We encourage you to use your video, especially if you are, asking a question, making a comment, and that you say your name and affiliation before speaking so we can know who you are. Throughout the meeting, we do hope that all questions and comments are really in the discussion in the room rather than through the chat, but we do encourage you to use the chat for troubleshooting if you have any issues. So if you're having technical issues, you can go ahead and send a message to Ellen Palmquist or Aaron Bothwell, who can help through the chat. And if you have any additional comments that you want to provide in writing, you are welcome to provide those to ODF via email, and that email address is on the screen here, and we'll put it in the chat, and it's jason.r.cox@odf.oregon.gov. You might have also noticed that the Oregon Department of Forestry's email addresses have changed. They've moved to this odf.oregon.gov extension at the end. So please, if you've been sending emails to staff, you might need to just update your contact list or who you're sending it to. All right, and let's go to the next slide. And this is just a reminder of where everything lives on Zoom. I think we all know this by now, but there's your mute button. We also encourage you to let us know who you are through the participant list if you haven't done that already. If you see the participant icon at the bottom and open that up, there's a rename button where you can let us know your name, affiliation, and pronouns, or however you like to be addressed. And when we get to the Q&A portions of today's meeting, you can raise your hand using the reaction button. So click on reactions, and the raise hand button is right there to get in the queue. And if you're on the phone only, you can press *9 to raise your hand at any time during the meeting. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so just our guidelines for today. We have a set agenda, so we hope to honor the agenda and provide a balance of speaking time. So when we get to the Q&A portions, we'll try to hear from as many of you as we can. And we hope that when we have discussion today that you're listening to understand and also asking those questions to clarify and respecting each other's points of view. We really want to make sure we hear from everyone and the different viewpoints, values, and interests. So please be sure to share that respectfully and focus comments on the topics for discussion today. All right, and I'll go over our agenda before passing it off to Liz Dent for some opening remarks on the next slide. Oh, and first, our project information contact. So if you want any more information about the Habitat Conservation Plan, feel free to email or contact Cindy Kolomachik. And if you have any questions or need more information about the Forest Management Plan, you can contact Bodie Dowding, and that information is on the screen, and we'll put that in the chat as well. And next slide. All right, so today we have a few key topics. We are going to start with a review of the Forest Management Plan, and really there want to provide some overview on what is the Forest Management Plan, kind of the background and the history, just so that everyone's aware of the same information, timeline for development of the Western Oregon Forest Management Plan. And then we're really going to dive into goals and strategy development for the Forest Management Plan. At our last meeting open to the public, we spent a lot of time talking about the goals for the FMP, and the Oregon Department of Forestry has now developed strategies to support those goals. So they'll provide some background information on that and walk through just a couple of draft strategies for your awareness, and then explain kind of the process moving forward for getting public input on those strategies. And then we'll have some time for updates on the Western Oregon Habitat Conservation Plan, as well as the NEPA process that's ongoing. And then we'll end with kind of summary and next steps. And our sort of formal part of the agenda is from 1 until 3 o'clock today. And then we'll have another hour set aside from 3 to 4 to just continue the conversation. If folks have more questions or want to provide more comments, ODF staff can stay on the line for that additional hour. And let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to hand it over now to Liz Dent, the Oregon Department of Forestry State Forest Division Chief, for some opening remarks. Over to you, Liz.
Great. Thank you, Sylvia. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see y'all, even though it continues to be in a virtual environment, but we've been at these meetings for a while. So really, as you know, I can speak for the ODF team that we really appreciate people's continued engagement and tracking of this important work for Oregon. So yeah, my name is Liz Dent and I serve as the State Forest Division Chief. Tell you a little bit, set the stage a little bit for the work that we've been doing. And as I said, many of you have been tracking, but it's helpful to put it in context again. So we, of course, have been doing this really what has become holistic planning for the management of these state forests. And those plans each need to support each other. So we've been talking about Habitat Conservation Plan, the Forest Management Plan as a vehicle, in part to implement the Habitat Conservation Plan, but also to bring in the protection strategies for other resources. And then there will be a set of implementation plans that couple with all the HCP and the FMP. And those really line out how we're going to actually implement those strategies over time and across the landscape. So where are we in the process? We have our first administrative draft of the HCP is on the website and it's moving through the NEPA process. So it is moving into a public draft of the HCP, and the federal services are handling that process for seeking public engagement, drafting some of the documents that go along with the HCP and the NEPA process. For the FMP, as Sylvia mentioned, we've been working on goals, have some information to share with you today around that work, and the strategies of the Forest Management Plan are what we're sort of getting into the thick of. Really, we've been dedicated to early engagement. The content that we are sharing with the public is a first draft, and we then will continue to refine those materials based on feedback. So it's really important to us that the process is inclusive, and we truly would like to receive your feedback and do the best that we can to incorporate that in any products moving forward, but really want to emphasize the draft nature of this material. Again, for the HCP, any changes to the HCP as compared to the administrative draft that we submitted, if you will, to the NEPA process, any changes to that will be facilitated through the federal process. And so the best place to comment will be in the spring of 2022 when the services release their draft environmental impact statement. So that will come out for public comment, and those comments go to the federal services, specifically NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then there will be opportunities for additional public engagement through that work with the draft EIS. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. So before we dive into the update on the forest management plan, we just kind of want to see who's in the room today. We probably don't have time to do introductions of the 67 participants we have, but we just want to get a sense of who's here. So we're going to launch an affiliations poll, if you don't mind launching that, just to get a sense of kind of who's here. So if you see that poll, we just want you to answer with whether, which option best describes your affiliation, whether you're a conservation group, an elected official with the county, federal, state agency, general public, a member of the Habitat Conservation Plan Steering Committee scoping team, industry, recreation rep, or with the tribes or other. And if you do pick other, go ahead and just send a chat to our host just so that we get a sense of that too. We'll give you a couple of seconds to fill that out. All right, and I think we have critical mass now with that poll. So we'll go ahead and end and share the results. So thanks folks for participating. It seems like we've got a lot of members from the conservation group representatives, also federal state agency, general public, industry reps, and a few others, and a couple of county elected officials as well. So thanks everyone for joining us today. All right. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Wilson at the Oregon Department of Forestry to provide a little bit of background on the forest management plan kind of process and structure before diving into some of the updates. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Sylvia. Welcome, everybody. So glad to see you all here today. And I would like to give a little bit of an overview prior to diving into the actual strategy update. So are the slides? There we go. Okay, thanks. So I think most of us have met before on these meetings. I am the Deputy Division Chief of Policy for the State Forest Division. And so I'm pleased today to help present this material that we've been working on. Previously, we've worked on goals, and now we are coming into working on the strategies. So next slide, please. So to start off, I'd like to provide some context for today's discussion, make sure that we keep our conversation focused. So we're here to discuss draft strategies for the new draft forest management plan for state-owned forest lands west of the crest of the Cascades, from the Columbia River to the California border. And this includes approximately 614,000 acres of border forestry lands and approximately 26,000 acres of common school forest lands. The management context for these lands can be found in statute and rule, including the greatest permanent value rule and the state forest planning rules. So for today's meeting, we want to keep the discussion focused primarily on the draft FMP process, including an update on the draft goals and an introduction to the draft strategies. We will also address the timeline for the draft FMP project and engagement opportunities. Other things such as state forest lands outside of this draft FMP scope, private forest lands and the Forest Practices Act, and federal forest lands are out of scope for today's discussion. Okay, next slide, please. So I think most of you are probably familiar with this by now, but this is the distributions of the land that I just referenced. Again, it's 614,000 acres of border forestry lands in 14 counties. It includes approximately 26,000 acres of common school lands. You'll see about 500,000 of those acres are up in the Tillamook and Clatsop State Forest area in Tillamook, Clatsop, Washington, and Columbia counties. And next slide. So ODF manages Oregon State Forest to achieve the greatest permanent value for Oregonians, which involves providing balance among social, economic, and conservation values. As we've discussed in previous meetings, ODF uses a tiered planning effort to guide and implement forest management actions. Forest management plans, or FMPs, provide for high-level management goals and strategies. The Board of Forestry adopts an FMP as Oregon administrative rule after making a finding that the FMP achieves that balance. Habitat conservation plans, or HCPs, are a mechanism by which non-federal landowners like ODF can comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. And while forest management plans are not required to be coupled with HCPs, HCPs provide assurances that allow for more certain and cost-effective implementation of the FMPs. An HCP serves to provide the bulk of conservation strategies for the FMP, so they complement each other that way. Implementation plans, or IPs, are mid-range plans that describe the current condition of the forest and serve to set discrete objectives for specific geographic areas and timeframes, and to provide an orderly progress toward FMP goals. Under the current FMP, IPs have been developed at the district level with a 10-year time horizon. Annual operations plans include the specific management actions for the upcoming fiscal year and describe how those actions fulfill IP objectives. Okay, next slide. So I'd like to take a moment also and refresh ourselves on the relationships among the various external influences on the FMP, as well as how the FMP and FMP goals and strategies are carried out through implementation plans and annual operations plans. In this diagram, we can see some of the external plans that have varying levels of influence on the FMP. There are other plans, rules, laws that have effects, but these are some good examples. The draft HCP has a very direct effect on the FMP in that its conservation actions will be the management standards that address the species that it covers. These standards will be incorporated into the FMP by reference and become a fundamental underpinning of how the FMP addresses the covered species and will also contribute to other native wildlife that have similar habitat requirements to the covered species. You'll notice there's also a very direct linkage between the Habitat Conservation Plan and the Adaptive Management Plan, which speaks to both the FMP strategies that are outside of the HCP as well as HCP specific monitoring and adaptive management. Other strategic documents help set goals and strategies for the FMP, such as ODFW's Oregon Conservation Strategy, ODF's Climate Change and Carbon Plan that was recently adopted by the Board of Forestry, and ODF Strategic Planning for Recreation, Education, and Interpretation. Of course, the FMP will comply with all other federal and state laws and rules. ODF is actively engaged with our state partner agencies at ODFW, DEQ, and DSL to ensure alignment with both legal standards and strategic vision. The FMP will also contain guidelines for asset management, implementation, and adaptive management, implementation plans, for implementation and adaptive management. The implementation plans, specifically, you see them there in the green boxes, resulting from the FMP there. And their associated monitoring plans and the adaptive management plan will all flow from the FMP goals and strategies. And annual operations plans, shown there in the pink, will in turn lead to be used to fulfill the implementation plan objectives. So most importantly, as the performance measures box there that's above the from the adaptive management plan, and you see it over the FMP, those performance measures will be developed that contain specific metrics and targets that will demonstrate progress towards FMP goals. While the performance measures will not be the only metrics monitored under the FMP, they provide the essential dashboard of plan performance for the Board of Forestry and others. Okay, next slide. All right, so what we're looking at here is a new revised timeline for the FMP process. We have to make various adjustments to this timeline in response to both our internal capacity and board direction and other external influences. But we'll start out with sort of where we've been. Back in June, we had an FMP and HCP update that we provided to the board. And then in November, we provided the guiding principles, which they had already approved in a prior process. They were somewhat edited, not major edits, but we provided those back to them, as well as the draft goals and an HCP update. So those draft goals, if you will remember, are what we worked on, and many of you have been part of that process. It began in August and kept going through November, working with our county partners, stakeholders, and the public. So today we're kicking off the public process to talk about the draft strategies under the FMP. And those draft strategies, we will be going to the board in March, along with some performance measures that we will be working with the board to develop, draft performance measures, and again, another HCP update. So in September, we would then be returning to, and each of these points of engagement with the Board of Forestry is an opportunity for them to provide us with direction. I want to be real clear here that we have not settled on the final goals or the final, and when we go in March, it won't be the final strategies. It is an open discussion with the board all the way through their final FMP decision, and when the FMP enters into, or when it's adopted actually as administrative rule. So anyway, in September, we are going to bring them a full draft FMP that will include the adaptive management guidelines, asset management guidelines, and implementation guidelines, as well as sort of the full narrative around the the FMP as well, which we haven't really been working, we have not really shown you to date. We've really been working on more the nuts and bolts of it, and that will all be tied together with management approach narrative so that it all makes good sense. And that will be a fully formed FMP draft document. However, during this entire period of time from approximately next January through to next November, we will be doing additional modeling of the FMP to present modeled outcomes to the Board of Forestry so that they can help decide where they want to position the plan regarding GPV. And the way that they'll principally do that is through the performance measures. For instance, there may be, there's obviously different goals, some of which have trade-offs associated with them. Perhaps say timber production and carbon storage are two examples there. And so providing them with the information so that they can make the informed choices to set performance measure targets that help guide that management. And then finally in 2023, in May, we anticipate Board of Forestry decision on the FMP to enter rulemaking and then finally adopt it as Oregon Administrative Rule. Needless to say, the further out the timeline gets from today, the more uncertain it becomes. It is, you know, there are things like fire season that can heavily impact our capacity to do the work, as well as board direction may change our course on certain items and cause additional work there. So anyway, all is, of course, that's why we're calling it a working timeline, because we fully expect that it could change over the course of these couple of years. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so sort of to put everything together on top there, we just went over the FMP timeline. And where the HCP sits relative to this is on the green timeline below that. You'll recall the administrative draft of the HCP was released back at the end of March, and there was a public scoping period associated with that. In the meantime, the draft EIS has been developed or is being developed. We anticipate the release of the draft EIS and the release of the public comment version of the HCP in the mid-March. What we will be doing is returning to the Board of Forestry and We will be returning to the Board of Forestry in May. We anticipate May. That meeting date has not been set yet, to provide them with a workshop on the draft EIS outcomes. And then again in June, and that is somewhat dependent on how much public comment is received, but to provide them with a summary of public comments received in the federal process on the draft EIS and the HCP. They will then, we anticipate they will direct us to move into development of a final EIS. And that final EIS would be released, we believe, and is on target for January of 2023. After that, there is a 30-day period. It's not a comment period. It is called a wait period. But while the public can digest the final EIS, and then after that wait period, the record of decision is published in the Federal Register. Okay, next slide. So sort of throughout this process with the goals and now with the strategies, we are using the same engagement process. So our process is to internally develop the draft content, review and approve those for external sharing. And that includes review and sharing with our state partner agencies. Then the draft content goes to the Board of Forestry, Forest Trust Lands Advisory Committee, and State Forest Advisory Committee. And shortly thereafter, the draft content goes to the public for review and input. And so then we review input from all of those sources and revise. And not only do we revise, but we also try to summarize the input for the Board of Forestry. So even if a goal or a strategy or some other piece of content in the forest management plan does not change, we are able to demonstrate to the Board of Forestry at least what the input was on it. And so a couple of recent feedback processes that we've been through. One was the November 3rd Board of Forestry meeting, where we presented those draft goals to the Board of Forestry. And then most recently, just the other day on December 3rd, we presented the draft strategies to the Forest Trust Lands Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. Okay, I think I'll give it back to Sylvia to talk about upcoming engagement.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so we're having our meeting open to the public now, and we'll plan for another meeting open to the public in the spring of 2022, date to be announced. But we do try to have these meetings, you know, every few months or so, to make sure that you have the latest and greatest updates on the forest management plan and the habitat conservation plan. So we'll announce the spring date when we have it. In the meantime, we are holding a couple of stakeholder meetings on December 9th and December 13th. And those are really going to be focused on the forest management plan strategies. And you'll get an update on those strategies in just a moment here. But the plan is to kind of get input on half of the strategies on December 9th, and then the other half of the strategies on December 13th. Since there are so many strategies, you know, we really had to split that up into 2 meetings so that we could have enough time to get input. If you are in this meeting and you want to be part of those joint stakeholder meetings and you haven't gotten an invite, please just send a chat message to Ellen Palmquist and we can make sure that you get an email. The stakeholder meetings really are open to anyone, but we don't want to inundate people's inboxes with invites that they aren't interested in. So we just keep a list of emails of folks that are interested in being on that stakeholder list. Oh, actually, you can email Bodie, I'm sorry, not Ellen, if you want to be invited to the stakeholder meeting. So with that, I think we can move into Q&A and discussion. So Mike provided that great background on the forest management plan process and timeline. And if you've been coming to these meetings, then you've received that update a couple of times. But if you're new to these meetings, then that might have been sort of, a fire hose of information. So we understand if there are a lot of questions. So let's go ahead and take the slides down for a second, just so we can see the faces. And if anyone has any questions on the forest management plan process timeline in general, please go ahead and just raise your hand in the platform. If you find that reactions button at the bottom and click on it, that's where the raise hand icon is. And of course, in a moment, we'll get into more of the FMP update on goals and strategies. But if you have any questions on the overall process, we can answer that now. All right, so I see a hand up from Susanna Gladwin, and just a reminder to just introduce yourself and your affiliation if you have one. So Susanna, over to you.
Hi, I'm in Northwest Oregon, Clatsop County. I have timberland, and I'm also involved in groups in watershed drinking water protection and spray protection of people. And I'm wondering, on the stakeholder meeting, who are stakeholders?
Really anyone that's interested in the process. So our stakeholder list, I'm not sure exactly how many folks are on the list right now, but it's a set of folks from conservation, recreation, industry, really any interest area that's, if you're interested in being a stakeholder, then you're on the list.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. And I don't know if Oregon Department of Forestry wanted to elaborate, but.
No, you got it right there, Sylvia. We do have these, you'll see coming up, additional joint stakeholder meetings, and we do want to be inclusive with those. We realize that not necessarily everybody wants to do the deeper dive into this stuff and attend more meetings, but we certainly welcome anyone who's interested to be in those stakeholder meetings.
Would you put that address back on? It was on so briefly on
Sure,
stakeholder meetings.
No problem. That's in the chat right now. And it's Bodie's email address. So it's bodie.t.dowding@odf.oregon.gov. And that's in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right, Brenna Bell.
Hi there, my name is Brenna Bell. I work with 350 PDX, and I also have a quick question about the stakeholder meetings. It is a lot of time. I'm wondering if there is an agenda that has the time, I know it's not specific, but the time general for the different strategies. So if there's one that we're particularly interested in, we can ensure that we are at that part of the meeting. I know that would be helpful.
That's a really great question, Brenna. I know that we have split up the goals into the two meetings, and we can provide a little bit more information on which goals are the topic for each of those two meetings. And our interest in those is really talking about the pieces that are most important to folks that are in the room. So we actually were going to start those meetings with a poll of like, today we're focusing on these 10 goals. Which ones do you want to get to first? So we don't have like a time certain for any of those right now. But if you let us know, which meeting or which goals you might be interested in the chat, we can try to give you some more information and like maybe prioritize some of those goals earlier on in the meeting for folks that have to drop off earlier.
Or even, I think what you said, just knowing which goals are going to be talked about at which meeting would be really helpful. If I can only go to one, then I could choose which one to go to.
Yeah, perfect. Let's, we have to go back to our agendas, but I think we can put that information in the chat. Maybe, Ellen, if you can help with that, just the list of goals that are the topic for each of those two meetings. Oh, she already.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and we do recognize that that's a lot of time to devote to this, but it's also a really complicated topic and hard to narrow it into just a few hours. We're also going to describe a little bit later today an online survey, which will be another way for you to provide your input on the strategy. So we'll get to that in a moment. All right, let's go to Brent Hennings. Looks like you're on mute, Brent.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm a private timberland owner in Southern Lane County, and apparently I'm in the wrong venue to find out information as to what the proposed habitat conservation plan rules are going to include for private timberland owners. I just wonder where I could go, what would be the proper venue to go to find that information out.
Yeah, Brent, this is Liz Dent. I bet I can get your contact information from this meeting and connect you up with someone. And you're exactly right. That's coming out of the private forest division, and this is the state forest division. But we can help connect you with that. I just need to make sure I have your contact information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, perfect. And Brent, if you put your email address in the chat to Ellen Palmquist, we can make sure to make that request happen.
Will do.
All right. Any other questions on the FMP in general or the process? Okay, great. Well, with that, I think we can move into the draft goal and strategy development for the forest management plan. So in a moment, I will turn it over to Bodhi, but I just want to remind folks that over the last couple of months, really last 6 months, I guess, we've had several meetings with the public and with stakeholders to work on the draft goals. And at the last meeting, you kind of saw how public input was used to update draft goals, and Bodhi will provide some more information on that too, on kind of the public feedback process and the goals. And then we'll move into talking about the strategies, which of course are intended to support the goals. So I'm going to turn it over to Bodhi to kick us off there, and we can put the PowerPoint back up.
Thanks, Sylvia. Let's see. Could we go to the next slide, please? Oh, thank you. So we spoke about draft goal review at the October meeting and kind of brought a summary of the feedback that we got for draft goals. And we made some changes, and I have here just a couple of examples of changes that were made. I don't have an exhaustive list of the changes, but a key topic that came up was drinking water. It seemed to be very important to a lot of people, so we actually added a drinking water goal, gave it its own goal. And the new goal is to protect, restore, and maintain forest drinking water sources that provide high quality drinking water and predictable water quantity for private and domestic use. And then based on other feedback we received, we actually modified the carbon goal. And I don't have the original here, but the modified goal is to contribute to carbon sequestration and storage, both within state forest lands and in harvested wood products. And so we've gone through goal feedback. We went through it with we received feedback from the Board of Forestry and from our state partners and FTLAC and SVAC, and from the public. And so at this point, we are moving on to the draft strategies, but there will be future opportunities for draft goal feedback, and those will be through the Board of Forestry public comment and then through the public comment on the final draft of the FMP. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've moved on to draft strategies. And the draft goals were designed to provide the economic, environmental, and social values from the state forest. And they were pretty broad, really, their goals. And so our strategies are to provide management direction for state forests to achieve the goals. So the strategies are just a little more granular than the goals, but they're not, most of them are not quite prescriptive enough for on the ground implementation. And so what we've started doing within ODF is going through what we're calling a strategy mapping process. And every strategy is being mapped, and we're trying to identify when that strategy will be implemented, tactics for how to implement it on the ground, interconnections between different strategies. And as you can imagine, these strategies intersect all over the place on the landscape, and we need to understand where they intersect and what the trade-offs might be and what the symbiotic relationships might be. And so we're looking for that. We're looking at what planning level we're going to need to look at implementing the strategies so that we don't miss them and we know where to properly plan for them. And then we're also identifying possible performance measures for the strategies. So we're able to measure if the strategy is helping us to meet the goal. Next slide, please. So Mike Wilson gave an excellent overview of our feedback process. And so this is just a visual of where we are with the draft strategy. So we have reviewed them internally inside ODF. Our core team and our subject matter experts developed the strategies. We had it reviewed by internal ODF teams, and we've made revisions internally, and we've sent them to the FTLAC and to the State Forest Advisory Committee. And so we are currently at step 6. Today you can see 12.7. We're looking for external review and input, and there will be a strategy link to it during this meeting for everyone to participate in. So currently we are looking for external input into our draft strategies. And then after we receive that input, we will review it and make further edits. And then we will submit the strategies to the Board of Forestry. And then based on Board of Forestry feedback, we will continue to modify strategies. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, I am going to share the draft strategies. Strategies and goal number 1. Can I get an affirmative from someone?
Yeah, we can see this, Bodie. However,
Are you seeing a black screen, or do I need?
We can see this, Bodie. Your audio is going a little in and out, so you may want to just turn off your video and see.
Okay, I apologize. I will turn off my video. Is that better?
Yeah, right now it is. We'll let you know if it gets worse.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia, for tracking that.
And if you don't mind just zooming in a little bit, that would help too.
Okay, so we're going to look at forest resilience. We're not going to go through all of the goals and strategies at this meeting today, but this is just an example of how the strategies are trying to, or are designed to implement goals. So forest resilience, the goal is to ensure healthy, sustainable, and resilient forest ecosystems that over time help achieve environmental, social, and economic goals to benefit all Oregonians. And then we'll just look at 1.3 for an example. This is a strategy for how we're going to do that. We're going to use integrated pest management to suppress or prevent invasive species damage in cooperation with other agencies and associations. We're going to develop and maintain an early detection and rapid response program to address the introduction of new exotic pests. Use aerial and ground surveys to monitor forest health to inform management decisions across the landscape. Maintain spatial data for long-term tracking and integrate forest health information into forest management decisions. And maintain a training and outreach program to field staff that incorporates existing and new disease agents to help with EDRR and IPM implementation. So hopefully you can see how that strategy is going to help us achieve the goal. So again, the strategies are just a little more granular than the goal. Then I'll go to goal 4 just as another example real quick. Fire. Mitigate the risk of wildland fire effects on forest production, wildlife habitat, and landscape function, and support wildfire resilience of local communities. And then if you just look at 4.1, implement fuels management strategies in the wildland-urban interface to increase firefighter safety and reduce risks to communities where appropriate. And then you can see the further strategies below the goal. So the way this works is the strategies are used to achieve the goals. And then we will also have measurable outcomes that will tell us if our goals are being achieved. Could we have the PowerPoint back up, please? All right, next slide, please. So as was previously said, the future opportunities for goal feedback would be at the public comment at the Board of Forestry meetings and on the draft forest management plan. And then those will also be avenues for strategy feedback, but we are sending out a draft strategy survey link, and there's the opportunity to participate with the joint stakeholder meetings. Hopefully, and so if you would send me an email and let me know if you would like to participate with those, we will make sure that you get signed up. With that, I will hand it back to Sylvia.
Perfect. Thank you, Bodie, for that background on the goals and the strategies and that sort of teaser for one set of strategies for a couple of the sample goals. So as Bodie mentioned, we have a survey that's now available to provide your written feedback on the strategies. There are a lot of goals and there are a lot of strategies. And so we tried to make a survey that would allow you to provide your feedback in a comprehensive way, but also in as easy a way as possible. And I'm going to hand it over to Ellen Palmquist to just walk through a little bit the format of the survey to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you when you do choose to participate. So Ellen, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sylvia. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yep, great. All right, so you're going to receive a survey link through a couple of different ways. We're going to send it in the chat today. You'll also receive a follow-up email from ODF with more information on the survey and the link. And then we're also going to post it on the FMP website. So you'll be able to access the survey in 3 different ways. As you can see, there's some background information here and also instructions on the survey. If you would like to provide really specific text edits, you can click this link highlighted here. It'll take you to the FMP website where the strategy document is posted, and you can email Bodie with any really specific text edits that you would like to make. So for this survey, you're going to be asked which resources you would like to provide input on first. You'll have a chance to provide input on all of these, but you need to do it one at a time. So let's say carbon. I'll click next, and it will not let you select more than one. So you'll be taken to carbon and asked if you think that these strategy themes are sufficient to meet the carbon goal. So this will take some time, but we really value your input. And you can mark things like yes, sufficient, no, not sufficient, and work your way through this. You'll also have an opportunity to provide comments. And then you'll be asked if you would like to provide input on another resource. So if you would like to then go to soil, you can select that, and it will take you to soil. And then if you decide you'd like to go back, or you forget that you already provided input on carbon, hit next, and you'll see that your responses have been saved. Then if you're ready to be done with the survey, you can say, please send me to the end. You'll be taken to a page that asks just a couple quick closing questions. You'll also be able to access the FMP website again, and you'll have contact information for Bodie. Then you can click done, and you're all set. Another thing to note is that as you move through the survey, once you click next on a resource page, all of your answers will be saved. So those will be submitted each time. So if you accidentally exit out of the survey on one specific resource topic, you'll only lose results for the resource that you were on. Anything that you did before that will be saved. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. So we encourage you all to participate in that survey, provide your written comments on the strategies, and let ODF know whether you think the strategies are sufficient to meet the various goals that are outlined in the FMP. And I think we're looking for submissions by January 3rd. So great activity for the holiday break. With that, I think we'll open it up to any questions or discussion on the forest management plan goals and strategies. So any questions you have on anything Bodhi presented, or if you want to make any comments at this time, we do have some time to do that. So go ahead and raise your hand in the queue and we'll see who we can get to. All right, I think I see a hand up from Susanna and then Darlene. So Susanna.
Hi, can we see everybody's responses to the survey somewhere after January 3rd?
Yeah, that's a great question. We will develop a summary of all responses after the surveys are submitted, yes. Does that answer the question?
But actual wording? Well, I would like to see the actual wording of comments. I think
So-
that's important.
Yeah, so one of the things that we'll be developing for the Board of Forestry meeting in March is not only a summary of those comments, but also, I believe last time with the goals as well, right? We gave them the full, like everything with the comments. So that will be verbatim. Everybody's comments will be reflected in the Board of Forestry, the staff report for the Board of Forestry meeting in March.
Great, thank you. I have other comments, but I've taken up some time. Can I make comments on goals? No?
Sure, yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to Darlene.
Well, I liked goals 1 through 12. I thought they were very good. On goal 13, generating revenue, and I always wish that the greatest permanent value list of what's mandated in that is published, because revenue is only one of, is it 10, 11? I forgot how many goals in the greatest permanent value ruling. And then further on, it's about maximizing timber revenue. And I know at the last legislature, there was a big push trying to get the private lands to generate tax money for county coffers, because right now, the big timber companies with RETA, tax law and other tax laws, real estate investment trust, they pay no money into county coffers, which produces a huge pressure on ODF to provide the money into county coffers. And also because the private timber people are cutting at such a short cycle, there's huge pressure on ODF trees for the big money-making big tree mills like the Stimson Mill and Pasconai, and plywood mills like the Hampton Mill, that are both situated in the middle of big ODF holdings. And that always bothers me. And I just want to comment about fire. There's a 200 tree per acre planting goal, and if there's not early thinning at about 25 years, the undergrowth, the side branches are dead, the fuel to oxygen mix is perfect for really hot, fast fires. And as long as we have that planting maximum, that whole picture, I think, leads to really the uncontrollable hot, fast fires. And I'd also would like to see a lot more deciduous trees, figure out where big leaf maple can be planted. I think it's the best for carbon capture. It
doesn't burn, it doesn't further forest fires like conifers do, and then let the alders grow because they do amazing things to soil and soil carbon. And what else? I think that, oh, and then under goal 17, there's nothing about on private forests about carbon sequestration.
Susanna, I think we might have lost you. Do other people hear Susanna? All right, well, I think we did hear your other comments, so thank you, Susanna, for that. And if we're able to, we'll get back to you. Darlene, go ahead.
Yeah, so I looked at the draft strategies yesterday, and they were posted. And one of the things that puzzles me, and I don't know if there's any comment from the staff on this, is that it seemed to me that there should be more of a division of the strategies as applied to habitat conservation lands, the habitat conservation preserves and the riparian conservation areas, because the strategies seem to be, for many of these strategies, should be different than they are for harvest lands or timberlands. And occasionally, you know, that's the thing that just bothers me the most about reading through the strategies. It's not really broken out by how those lands are going to be managed.
For that, Darlene. That is, I'll let Nick Palazzolo speak to this in a second, but I guess what I'll say is that there is the desire with the strategies to be holistic. So it's sort of speaking to both. And that you're not the first one that has commented on that, that, you know, it's not very well clear what the division is among those things, but certainly some of the patch size dynamics and things like that are, you know, especially when we're talking about large patches and interior habitat and that type of thing, spoken to by the draft HCAs and the draft HCP. But maybe I'll let Nick weigh in here for a minute.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nick Palazzolo. I'm the lead wildlife bio on the HCP for ODF. And we struggled with that a lot, and we had a lot of internal discussion around it. And where we landed ultimately, as Mike just suggested, is, you know, these strategies are the forest level strategies. They're for you know, the forest as a whole. The next task, or the task, remains to parse out how that plays out across different parts of the landscape, including putting it into the context of habitat conservation areas, riparian conservation, and you know, the forest matrix outside of those areas.
So when will that part happen, the parsing out?
Very soon.
No, but it will be part of the forest management plan, the draft plan.
Yeah, and so the notion would be, you know, for example, you might have this high level strategy with some sub strategies, and then the plan itself needs to explain how that plays out, both at the landscape level and then where that lands in our, you know, planning and policy documents that you can see. So there's a narrative there around, hey, this part of the landscape, you know, fulfills this objective, this one, that objective. And then people, yeah, there's that expectation, and, you know, we intend to meet it, that people will understand how that plays out at the sale level, or at the sale planning level, timber sale planning level.
Yeah.
Darlene.
So one thing that would be helpful, because I haven't actually seen it, like for the existing forest management plan that would cover these lands, may not be exactly the same areas, to see what a forest management plan looks like now, and then to see how it can be modified with this habitat conservation plan. Can you post a link or something so that we can sort of see that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can post the link to our current forest management plan. Keep in mind, our current forest management plan does not really envision a landscape with habitat conservation areas for 70 years and a matrix.
Yeah, and I see
that's
how
more
it's going to be
holistic.
different, which is why we're having to do it over again. But to see sort of the level of detail that the forest management plan has would be helpful. The
Sure.
other
Yeah.
thing, there
Sorry,
was
go ahead.
there was one mention about a layered forest structure, and so this is more from other documents that I have seen, but there are the sort of layered and complex forest structure, the future forest structure that's planned for different areas. And the thing that I've never been quite sure about, for the ones that are really being managed in those directions, are those generally areas that are not planned for harvest.
This is Liz, Darlene. So in the terminology that you're referencing is in the current forest management plan.
Yeah.
So we'll get that link to you and you'll see it there. And really what the current forest management plan does is it designates across the landscape the areas that would be managed for these different structure types. So you've talked about layered and complex structure as an example. And so where those areas are designated, there's no harvesting of stands that are already in older forest structure. There is harvesting allowed in areas that are designated to become layered. The management within those stands is designed to move those forests to that layered condition. So that's in the areas designated for complex structure. So that's a combination of layered and older forests. Outside of those areas that are designated, there's more a flexibility to harvest areas that are characterized as layered stands. The rationale or the way that that is framed up is that in the forest management plan, it sets a target for how much of the landscape is going to be in layered or older forest structure. And so we've characterized that 30% in those areas that are designated across the landscape.
30% is designated for what?
30 to 50% is the target under the current forest management plan. 30 to 50% is the target for creating layered and older forest structure on the landscape for each district.
Okay.
But again, that's the current plan, and the reason we're doing a new forest management plan is because of the process and pursuit of the habitat conservation plan. So the habitat conservation plan that we have drafted would not pair well with the current forest management plan. So a new forest management plan enables us to implement an HCP should the Board of Forestry approve that in 2023 in a way that's consistent with the new plan.
Yeah, okay, thanks. It still seems like at some point you have to have it really well designated, the different management strategies for conservation areas versus harvest areas. And what I don't see that in the strategies now. So that's what
no, you're spot on. And I appreciate your patience on that. And I'll tell you, our philosophy here was that we wanted to, along the way, as we develop the goals and strategy, make sure we're getting input from the stakeholders and the public and our county partners versus just, a year and a half down the road, sort of unveiling a fully baked plan. So there's a trade-off there. It's hard. We're asking a lot of people to kind of hang in there while we get to that more detailed information, but we're really learning a lot as we go, and we're able to incorporate the feedback from the stakeholders.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz, Darlene. All right, a couple more hands up. So Amanda and then Laura. So Amanda, over to you.
Yeah, hey guys, Amanda Astor, Associated Oregon Loggers, Forest Policy Manager and Certified Forester. One thing that I was just wondering, and Mike, sorry if I missed this in the beginning, but I know that we've got sort of strategies and performance measures linked together on the timeline. So I am just wondering, as I think about performance measures and how we actually measure our success for these strategies and our goals and thinking about SMART goals, Some of the items on the strategies, which again, they're a little bit more detailed than the goals, which is good. But some of the ones, for instance, in forest resilience and talking about developing good partnerships with other agencies, how are you going to create measurable, like actual smart, measurable goals for that and performance measures? Just wondering how you're going to measure success and kind of when we're going to start to see that, or if there's going to be certain strategies that simply don't have anything measurable. Just kind of wondering what that process looks like.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Amanda. We're going to have some that just don't lend themselves well to being measured. Obviously we can always, report on partnerships we built and that sort of thing, but right, they don't lend themselves to a more standardized metric. And there's going to be a lot of metrics and monitoring plans that really don't rise to the level of performance measures necessarily. So there's a lot more metrics in that. And what we're really shooting for with the performance measures are metrics that speak to whether or not we're achieving the goals. And so that's a little bit higher level. So it's really more of any particular goal. We really should be able to see that reflected in a performance measure. If we're not able to come up with a performance measure for something that's a goal, I guess there's a question as to, should that be a goal? Or if there's a, there could be performance measures that address multiple goals as well. Or there may be a more linear relationship to that. A lot of that will depend on what the board really wants. They will weigh in more heavily than anyone else and ultimately decide what the right performance measures are and what those targets for those performance measures are for them.
Can I do a quick follow-up, Mike?
Sure.
Yeah, and I think you somewhat got to the point I was trying to make of, I would be really critical of if we can't tie a performance measure to the strategy. Like you mentioned, I would personally question why it's included in the FMP, recognizing that a forest management plan is to determine how we should manage state forest lands. And so if there's something related to how the agency conducts business in general, to me, that doesn't necessarily need to be included in a forest management plan. It should, to me, be more something included in agency documentation of, whether it's an MOU with different agencies or whatever. As I read through these, I'm just starting to look at the details here. I haven't gotten fully through them. We can talk more at stakeholder meetings, but just something that I initially noticed with the strategies so far.
And that's something good to note for everyone as they go through this is this something that really looks like a strategy to you? Is it something that looks like more operational policy that doesn't need to be reflected in the forest management plan? And we definitely have a diversity of opinion on that. We found that out in previous attempts at revising the forest management plan of the level of detail that different folks like. So for everybody, that is actually good input for us to hear as well as to whether or not the strategies are, if there's too many and perhaps something that lives in operational policy versus something that's actually a supporting strategy outside of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda and Mike. Laura, over to you.
Hi, this is Laura Wilkson with Hampton Lumber. So I have a question about the goals, and I know this has been talked about at Board of Forestry meetings and with FTLAC as whether or not the goals are listed in any sort of priority. And the only reason why I'm bringing this up again is because I noticed that they are in a different order than they were previously when it was just goals, now that there's strategies on there. So was that order changed purposely, or was it just drafting and that was kind of where it landed, or why are they in a different order now?
I can speak to that, Mike. They were not purposely changed. We we made changes to goals based on Board of Forestry feedback, public comment, and FTLIC feedback. And some of them were renamed actually due to changes requested in language. And so there was no attempt to put one above another. It was just how they naturally flowed. I think if you look, some of the, like forest resilience is the one that comes to mind. It used to be forest restoration. It is in the spot that restoration used to be. So we have not made any attempts to order the goals.
Yeah, I just noticed like carbon is now higher than it used to be. It was after timber production before, and now it's, you know, right after climate change. And so I wasn't sure if there was some reasoning behind the change, you know, the movement around, or if, like, you know, like I said, as you guys are just going through it, that's just kind of how the draft, you know, got laid out.
Yeah, that's, I was helping lay out the draft, and that's what pretty much happened. Is that's just where they ended up landing when we were working on them.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Laura. Others, any other questions on the draft goals and strategies for the FMP? All right, Susanna, I think I see you back. Hopefully your audio is working now. Susanna, if you're able to unmute yourself.
I'm trying, I was struggling to unmute. Thank you. I got confused. So I know across from me is Buster Creek Drainage in Clatsop County, and that's a conservation management area. And working for older forest type. Is that still going to be the same way that it will be managed? Are you changing the conservation management plans where you don't have clear cutting, maybe thinning, but no clear cutting as you try to achieve a, what is it, the older forest structure?
So the context will definitely change in this new FMP. We will be describing habitat or forest types and their structure, although they won't be described the same way as they are in the current forest management plan with the 5 structure types. They will be described more as serial stages. However, regarding the actual designation of specific areas, so it will be changing from what our current desired future condition for complex structure is. It will be changing, and the biggest change that you'll be able to see there, and this is out in the administrative draft of the HCP, are the habitat conservation areas. And so those would be, you know, I guess in short, the most analogous areas to what you're talking about. And so when you talk about that specifically and the Buster Creek drainage, part of that, you know, a large part of that area, I believe, currently is desired future condition complex, and also a large part of that area is in the draft habitat conservation areas under the HCP, but they are not exactly the same. If that answers your question.
Yes, I have some concern in renaming different areas that possibly it would open up more large, big trees for cutting, which are the best for carbon capture, than how it had been managed in the past. That's my concern. Can I just state another concern that I didn't say before, but does state forestry put out rodenticides for mountain beaver?
No, we do not use rodenticides any longer. We've used them very rarely in the past, and we've just made the decision not to use them.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that the bird recovery people are often not wanting to speak up because of their funding streams, but they really beg people. I found 2 dead owls to always put them in the garbage rather than bury, so that the rodenticides don't get in the food chain. So thank you, State Forestry, that you don't do that anymore.
Thank you, Susanna. Okay. Others, any other questions, comments on the draft goals and strategies? Okay. Oh, a hand up. So I'm sorry, I didn't see Nancy's hand. Nancy Webster, over to you.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Webster, Rockaway Beach, North Coast Communities for Watershed Protection. And we were really happy to see that drinking water now has a special place as a goal. And the next step is to how do we implement protecting drinking water sources, and from spring boxes to municipalities. This last year in August, many communities were facing water shortages and really afraid of what's going to happen. Now it's raining, but it's not going to rain forever here. And so how does ODFC moving forward in deciding what types of protections do our drinking water sources need to ensure adequate water? And I think it's not even like we moved here 10 years ago and it was problematic, but now with the heat dome and the drought, it's really serious. And I don't think we have much room to gamble. And in the habitat conservation plan, it seems like certain areas are not for harvest. And to me, ideally, it'd be great that if our drinking water sources were not available for harvest. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. All right, see a hand up from Seth Barnes.
Yeah, I'm not going to take my camera off since I left my external camera at the office, and so hopefully you're all right. Probably better off not seeing me. But I just had that last question spurred a thought. One, I'm grateful that State Forest continues to contribute, to both the carbon storage and the carbon sequestration. Young trees sequester at a faster rate, and I think that's important. Keep a note, the older trees store, but it's that storage that I want to talk about, especially in regards to drinking water. One of the worst things we've seen in terms of detriment to drinking water is wildfire. And I'm curious, since we're setting aside large areas here for with sort of a very limited to no harvest for 70 years, is there anything in these strategies, and I haven't had a chance to read through them all, dealing with wildfire and the wildfire issue and talking about trying to, especially it's going to be super challenging, I would imagine, in these large set-asides to mitigate for what is set up to be some pretty dense forest that was, a lot of these forests were originally planted after the Tillamook burn and planted with the idea that they would be harvested. And so they were planted at densities that would reflect that sort of management. To set them aside now, especially when you're talking about decades of hands-off approach, would leave a lot of these watersheds very vulnerable to large-scale wildfire. I'm curious whether there's any thought being put into, sort of strategies to mitigate for that, whether it's thinning in some of these large set-asides or, what have you. So that's my question.
Thanks, Seth. So, I think as you're probably aware, and for those who aren't, I'll just kind of briefly go over it, that within the habitat conservation areas under the draft HCP, the management focus is on habitat. And so although there's management that would happen, there's thresholds and limits on that management. But one of the things is conifer management, density management, and it's not easily described because it's a habitat prescription and not a general thinning prescription, and something that would have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis. But there's the allowance for that. And so the idea is not that we would just have overly dense stands growing up, but that actually we'd be using density management to get the appropriate amount of layering and structure. Not all that different, really, than what we do for some of our structure-based management. I mean, the fundamental concepts are largely the same. Now, that's not going to treat all of those acres. Another piece, though, so in the FMP, to answer the question briefly, yeah, there's wildfire strategies in there that kind of speak to some of this stuff. Within habitat conservation areas, we are still trying to figure out the right language in the HCP, and we're pretty much there. And this is a change that you will see when the public draft of the HCP comes out for comment, something that was not really in the administrative draft that's currently available. And that is trying to characterize what that fuels management might look like from the standpoint of trying to protect and maintain habitat. So it does not look like large swaths of fuel breaks. It really focuses in more on types of management that could result in larger well-spaced single-story stands and that kind of thing. Things that can still mitigate that risk for wildfire, but also not really detract from the habitat quality. You're not going to find a whole lot of detail in there. Again, those are prescriptions that really would have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we get them right. Also, we just don't want to be overly prescriptive in the HCP about exactly how we implement those various things. So that's kind of an answer to the question, unless maybe Nick had something to add.
No, I think that covers it well, although, yeah, I mean, so the focus might be more on lather fuels in HCAs than on density. And it doesn't preclude fuel breaks either inside or outside. And outside obviously is easier. But so, fuel breaks will likely be a tool in the bag as well.
And Todd, before we moved on, did you have anything to say about the wildfire strategies in general? Seth?
Maybe not more than what you've already articulated, just a recognition that we are trying to identify those wildlife strategies that will be compatible with the HCP and overall forest management objectives.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's good to hear. I know that's you drive up these canyons now after these 2020 wildfires, and it's a concern, especially when you start talking about large swaths of land that are going to be sort of set aside. And we've seen what that can look like now in our lifetimes even. And that's, so I appreciate that thoughts going into how to mitigate for that and manage appropriately.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Seth. And just a quick time check here. We do want to make sure we leave time for an update on the Habitat Conservation Plan and the NEPA process, but I see hands up from Lauren and Betsy and want to make sure we hear from you too. So maybe a couple of quick comments and then we'll move to the next update. And we always have that 3 to 4 p.m. informal discussion block at the end for further conversation or answers to questions. So Lauren, over to you.
Hi, Lauren Anderson, Forest Climate Policy Coordinator with Oregon Wild. This topic has come up a few times, but one issue is a good sort of greenhouse gas inventory on state forest lands, basically assessing where the carbon pools are on the landscape and figuring out, where carbon moves across pools. So from, live biomass to dead biomass to the atmosphere, all of that accounting I think would be really valuable to incorporate into your climate change goal. Right now, the goal is focused on demonstrating climate smart forest management that supports all of these other goals, and that's fantastic. But part of climate smart management is really kind of having an accurate read of where the carbon is on the landscape right now and how it's changing. So just want to flag that for folks.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And Betsy?
Hi, I'm Betsy Herbert with North Coast Communities for Watershed Protection. And I'd like to speak to the goal number 10, drinking water. Commend you for putting that in because there's so much concern these days with drinking water and the impacts of forestry that we're having both on water quality and quantity. So especially glad to see this in here with some really good first steps towards addressing what to do about this. I would like to suggest, since you called out in the first goal 10.1, and then there's particularly 10.1A, is you're calling out the to consult the Water Resources Department to identify these domestic water sources that might be in your under the influence of your management. I would like to just suggest that you would also consult the Department of Environmental Quality's source water assessments for any of these identified community water systems. They've consistently done very intensive assessments of watersheds, identifying the potential contaminating sources. And also they include an assessment of the vulnerability of the particular watershed. So I think that those documents would be quite helpful when you're doing these assessments to determine the condition that is, and also just to identify and protect and also to restore. It would be very helpful to consult the source water assessments that DEQ does. That's just one of the suggestions that I have. I'll be making more written comments about the drinking water. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, Betsy. All right. Well, with that, let's move into our next topic for today. So we want to provide an update on the Western Oregon Habitat Conservation Plan and the NEPA process. So we'll have kind of a tag team update from Melissa Klungel at ICF and Cindy Kolomachik at Oregon Department of Forestry and Michelle McMullen with NOAA Fisheries. So I'm going to hand it off to Melissa first to kick us off.
Thanks, Sylvia. Hi, I'm Melissa Klungel with ICF. I'm the HCP project manager supporting the development of the HCP for ODF. And today I'd like to provide an overview on where we are in preparing the public draft HCP. If you could go to the next slide, please. So since the public meeting in October, the HCP team has been continuing to work towards finalizing the public draft HCP. This top item is a hot link, the summary of key draft HCP changes, and it's to a file that's posted on ODF's HCP website summarizing the key changes that have been made to the HCP since the administrative draft was posted for the public. These changes were the focus of the October public meeting and were made as a result of operations review by ODF and additional review by the scoping team. So I'm not really going to go into what those were today, I'm just including this here as a FYI, if you access the PowerPoint later and want to go back and refamiliarize yourself with what those changes may look like. But just as a reminder, you know, right, those changes, like I said, were made as a result of ODF operations review and coordination with the scoping team. Moving forward, the HCP project team is now working on finalizing the public draft HCP. We're working with the scoping team. And this document will be included with the draft EIS when it's released for public comment. There are some minor changes that are being made at this point, but those are really for detail, clarity, and consistency across the document and are not really requiring or not at all requiring changes to the effects analysis. So from a time frame standpoint, we're looking at finalizing the public draft HCP in December and January. And then submitting permit applications, that would be the incidental take permit application to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries in early 2022. Once that public draft HCP is complete, it will be released with the draft EIS and the public will have an opportunity to provide formal written comment. And that will be part of the NEPA process, which, as Sylvia mentioned, Michelle will be describing here in a little bit. And I think Cindy was going to talk about the schedule.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. And good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you and really appreciate your engagement and the great conversation that we've been having. It seems to get more and more rich the more people that participate. So thanks for coming. So as Mike mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we've had a few updates to our timeline and we've updated the format a little bit. And he and Melissa have together really kind of covered the updates on the HCP timeline. So I think that I'll go through and just give you an orientation here to the format so you know what you're looking at, and then maybe hit a couple of the high points. So first I would just draw your attention to the FMP is in orange here, the HCP in green, and NEPA is in blue. And you'll see that we've also got some open circles, and the open circles that are yellow are board engagement. So that's when we plan on going to the board. I'll just also mention that you see a lot of board engagement on the FMP side and not so much on the HCP side. Every time we go to the board with the FMP, practically, we're going to have an HCP update. So just wanted to mention that there. Also, you'll see the white open circles, and those are just indicating the milestones. And those milestones are described below the line of the process. And then the work we are doing is the dotted line above them. So everybody can see where we're at. So as you've heard from Liz and from Mike and also from Melissa, kind of the next big milestone is the release of the draft environmental impact statement for public comment. And Michelle will go through that in some detail, but that is that analysis of the alternatives developed during the scoping process. So that's going to be a really intricate and large document for everyone to consume. At the same time, we are going to be releasing that public draft HCP that Melissa described. And again, that's going to be for comment as well. So this is the first time that we've had the draft HCP go for official comment within the federal process. We're, like she said as well, we're submitting our incidental take permit applications as well to both of the services, the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries at this time. So a lot happening at the beginning of the new year. And again, our draft HCP is a lot to consume. Many of you have already looked at that, but this draft EIS is also going to be a lot to try to understand and consume and comment on. And because of that, we are planning to have, and now I'll just draw your attention to the NEPA line here, the first yellow dot, the DEIS, which is the draft EIS outcomes. We're planning to try to have a special Board of Forestry meeting, maybe half a day, where we would give a kind of like a workshop format, where we would give a presentation on the results of that analysis of the alternatives. So essentially the outcomes of the draft EIS. And that way our Board of Forestry can ask the services and the ICF NEPA team questions about the analysis, the outcomes, different opportunities for, kind of changing things around or what they might anticipate, being potentially good for us to consider. And it not only will it inform the board, but it will also help the public have a better orientation to the analysis so that you're not trying to just kind of read this thing at home alone. You may be able to also ask some questions there. So we're shooting for early May because that'll still allow a couple more weeks of the 60-day public comment period. And then again, Mike did cover this, but we're planning to come back to the board, the next yellow dot there on the blue line. We'd come back to them either in June or July, depending upon how much public comment we get, because we have to package all of that up. And so we'd like to take that to the board as soon as we can. If we can, we'll do it in June, provide that summary. And this will also be the time for the board to give us any direction if they want us to make any slight modifications to the proposed action, which is our current HCP. based on the draft EIS. And that is the most opportune time for this discussion to occur, because then immediately we go into the development of the final EIS. And then the next action on our end is that we would go to a Board of Forestry decision on the HCP in April of 2023. So as we've been talking about this for the last couple of years, we've been really shooting for a February 2023 timeframe for approval of the HCP, along with the EIS components and the incidental take components as well. And so that's just getting pushed out a couple of months, largely in part because the analyses are and the modeling is just taking a bit longer than we had anticipated. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Michelle McMullen with NOAA Fisheries. And we're just going to keep the same timeline up here because she's going to be speaking to it.
Thank you, Cindy. If you can just confirm that my microphone is working and you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you. So my name is Michelle McMullen. I'm with NOAA Fisheries in the Oregon Coast Branch in Roseburg, Oregon. And today I wanted to start with a quick reminder of what NEPA is and how it applies to this project. Then I want to move on to accomplishments and where we currently are in the process and provide an overall big picture summary. So let's talk a little bit about NEPA. NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act, is the process used by the federal agencies to make informed decisions. For this HCP, we've decided to go with an environmental impact statement, or EIS. An EIS is the most in-depth analysis of the NEPA process. And for this effort, NOAA Fisheries is the lead federal agency, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is a cooperating agency. What that means is that both agencies will use the NEPA analysis to make decisions about the issuance of an incidental take permit for the Habitat Conservation Plan. So each agency will separately release or issue an incidental take permit. Many of you may be familiar with NEPA done by the Forest Service, or BLM, for federally managed lands. And in those cases, those federal agencies have a huge amount of discretion. And they say to the public, okay, tell us what you want us to do on every acre of the land we manage. And that is part of the federal lands process that those agencies go through. What we're doing, though, is a very different type of NEPA analysis for the HCP. And that's because we are focusing on Oregon Department of Forestry's proposed action. We are analyzing that proposed action, and we are also creating alternatives to the proposed action that were informed by the feedback we received during scoping. But our focus is really on, do we issue the incidental take permit or do we not issue it? And in this case, our action under NEPA is that decision about the permit. Now, there are four main components of NEPA for our process: scoping, the draft EIS, the final EIS, and the record of decision. The first formal step in the NEPA process is scoping, which is an early and open process for determining the scope of the issues for analysis in an EIS. And our NEPA process officially began with scoping on March 8th, earlier this year, with the publishing of the Notice of Intent to Conduct an EIS. The scoping period was for 30 days originally, and you can see the timeline back up on the screen. So on the bottom blue line where it says NEPA, you can see the very first open white bullet is begin the NEPA process. The scoping period was for 30 days originally, but the public did ask for an extension. And we did issue a 2-week extension through April 21st. During that time, we also held a public meeting on March 31st, and information about the process and that meeting is available on the NOAA website. And I know Kearns and West will post the NOAA website information into the chat for us. Thank you. All of the comments that we received during scoping went through regulations.gov, and those comments are published there if anybody wants to see them. When we received the scoping comments, we examined them in whole and in part and assessed all of them. However, none of the comments submitted during scoping were determined to be complete alternatives, but we wanted to fully embrace those comments, so we considered not only the literal suggestions provided, but we also considered what we determined to be the intent behind those suggestions. And with the assistance of the ICF NEPA team, we did some very deep diving into those suggestions and comments that arose as part of the scoping process. So now we have developed alternatives, and we used the scoping comments to inform those alternatives. The NEPA regulations also includes on how to develop alternatives for the NEPA analysis. And with the assistance of the ICF NEPA team, we have finished the final modeling and data gathering to wrap up development of our selected alternatives. NOAA Fisheries, we are the ones who develop these alternatives. That is our role as the lead agency for NEPA. And as part of that process, we do coordinate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we also sought advice from ODF about what is operationally feasible. But NOAA Fisheries is the one who makes the final decision on all of the alternatives. So once we did develop those alternatives, we then ran them through a screening process to determine and select which ones we would carry forward for analysis in the NEPA document, the draft EIS. And the draft EIS will also include a list of all the alternatives we developed and how they fared in the scoping process. I'm sorry, in the screening process. And that screening process included criteria like, does the alternative meet the purpose and need for NOAA Fisheries, which is tied to our decision about the incidental take permit, which is the focus of our federal decision and the NEPA analysis. Just to be clear, ODF is not part of the final alternative selection. NOAA Fisheries, we did decide the final alternatives that will be analyzed in detail in the draft EIS. So now we are still working on the draft EIS. We are expecting to publish it early next year. We're currently targeting March 2022 for that. That is the second open bullet on the NEPA blue line on the timeline. Multiple internal reviews within NOAA Fisheries are part of that process, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also has an opportunity to review the draft as a cooperating agency. In the draft EIS, we include a summary of the scoping comments, the alternatives, and analysis of important topics like economics, geology and soils, water resources, cultural resources, and others. When we do publish the draft EIS, we will have another comment period where we ask for review and comment on both the draft EIS, which is the NEPA document, as well as the draft HCP. And this is the next point of public engagement in the overall process. The minimum required time for comment on a draft EIS for NEPA is 45 days, but right now we are anticipating that we will keep the comment period open for 60 days. We will also hold another public information meeting and all comments, and we will also be taking comments during the public meeting as well as through regulations.gov again. So in summary, overall, the NEPA process, there are 4 big components. The first is the scoping, which we've completed. We're now in the draft EIS, which we expect to release in March 2022. This will be the next opportunity for public engagement. And as noted previously, in addition to comments on the NEPA document, we will also be asking for comments on the HCP. We are expecting the third step, the final EIS, tentatively in January 2023. And then publishing the record or decision, also known as the ROD, in tentative February 2023. And that concludes the NEPA update.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you also, Cindy and Melissa. So we have a little bit of time for some Q&A and discussion on the Western Oregon HCP and NEPA process. So maybe if we take the slides down, Just want to see if there's any questions, thoughts, any clarifications that the team can provide. Go ahead and raise your hand and we can get a queue going here. There are no questions, that's okay too. All right, do you see a hand up from Susanna?
I know, I'm sorry, I keep jumping in there, but I think it's very important on keeping the rivers and the feeder creeks clean enough for salmon, that the horizontal measurement setback on cutting up to streams is maintained rather than a surface area measurement. And does ODF use a horizontal measurement setback from water, from streams and rivers versus the surface measurement setback?
Yes, we do. We use a horizontal distance. We do not use a slope distance.
Oh, good. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Susanna. And Susanna, if you or others have, more specific questions like that, I think it's always great to get in touch with ODF staff offline. Always happy to answer those questions. Any others? Any questions on the HCP process or the NEPA update here? Okay, that's great. Well, I think I can just spend a couple of minutes here on next steps, and then I'll turn it over to Liz Dent for some closing remarks. And we can also stay on the line for additional discussion if folks have any other questions or comments or want to dive a little bit more deeply. But in terms of next steps, again, we'll have a couple of stakeholder meetings on December 9th and December 13th to focus on the draft strategies for the forest management plan. So hopefully if you want to go to those, you've been invited, and if not, then you can send an email to Bodie, and we have his, we'll put his email again in the chat, and it's going to be on the next slide in just a minute here. We also encourage you to fill out the draft strategies survey by January 3rd. We included that link in the chat earlier today, and there's also going to be an email going out tomorrow that goes to a broader group of folks with a link to that survey. So really appreciate your thoughts in advance on whether you think these strategies are helping to meet the FMP goals, and any comments that you have for changing the strategies, removing strategies, adding strategy, just anything that you think would be helpful. We will plan to have another meeting open to the public to provide updates on the forest management plan and the habitat conservation plan and the NEPA process sometime in early spring. So we'll let you know when that date is set. And of course, in March of 2022, I'm looking forward to release the public draft environmental impact statement and the draft habitat conservation plan for sort of that formal review process. So those are our next big pieces coming up. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Liz Dent with just any closing remarks.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, just a couple of observations from today. This is, I'll just reiterate, really helpful for us, having the conversations, getting the feedback. For me, what I am seeing is an opportunity for us to maybe help clarify the differences between the plans and the roles that they play. So the habitat conservation plan, forest management plan, implementation plan, and Mike went through a nice graphic of that, but I think it's, for me, it seems helpful to do everything we can to be clear about that and the way that it plays out in that from Michelle's presentation just now, that NOAA Fisheries is leading the work at this point on the HCP, and we're supporting with any data requests that might be there, and they're obviously getting support from ICF. But our main work as an agency and as a division is really focused on the forest management plan. And so that's why you hear during these meetings that tends to be our focus. It's completely natural that would kind of tack over to HCP questions because they do relate to each other. And so, I think part of the conversation we need to keep having is that they do relate to each other, and we're at this point really trying to focus on the forest management plan. So that's one overarching observation for me today. The other one was having that really great discussion around the current forest management plan. So we kind of toed into what the current forest management plan is about. And what I just want to make sure everyone is aware of is that we continue to implement that plan. That is an Oregon administrative rule for managing state forests that has been approved by the Board of Forestry first in 2000 and updated in 2011. So that's what we're implementing. And we recognize that this HCP has characterized some different ways of achieving conservation. And so we'll just keep trying to do the best we can to provide clarity around what we're doing now, recognizing there's something here on the horizon that has keen interest from our stakeholders and county partners. So there's a lot of plans in play all at the same time, and we just remain committed to try to continue to untangle those for everybody. And just once again, deep appreciation for people's time and commitment. And as Sylvia said, we're available offline, follow up with emails, and we'll find a way to, if we can't answer it, to get someone in touch with you to answer your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. Appreciate those closing thoughts there, and really appreciate everyone's participation today and kind of continued commitment to attending these meetings and getting updates and providing your feedback throughout the process. I think we heard that some folks want to know where the recording from today will be and the slides, the PowerPoint slides. So Ellen or Aaron, if you don't mind just putting the email address in the chat. All of the, today's meeting recording, the PowerPoint slides agenda is all on the project website. So we'll put that in the chat for folks that don't know where that link is. And so with that, I think that concludes kind of our formal meeting for today, and the ODF team can stay on for a while longer if folks have additional questions or comments. So we'll just keep this meeting open for a few minutes, and if folks are all hopping off, then we'll hop off too. But thank you everyone for your engagement and participation, and have a great afternoon if you're not staying on. All right, and if folks do want to stay on, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand and we can get a queue going. I think I saw someone raise up an icon that maybe they were trying to raise their hand. So I just wanted to check in, but it went away. All right, maybe I was just seeing things. Okay, well, if there are no other questions or comments, then we can just go ahead and hop off. Thanks again, everyone, and looking forward to your survey responses, and have a great holiday season if we don't see you before then. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Bye.